Alright, what's up everybody? So 41 hours is how much time I put into God of War Ragnarok before getting the Platinum Trophy earlier this week. It's been one hell of a ride. Honestly, I went through a whole process myself, a whole journey I should rather say, sort of figuring out what my thoughts about it were as I'm playing it, because I went through many sort of ups and downs with the game. Overall, I had a fantastic time with it, don't get me wrong, but I think ultimately sort of a conclusion that I very much settled on is that I had more fun with God of War Ragnarok than I did with 2018. And that is a massive feat. I honestly didn't even know if I was supposed to expect that from it, being of course that I knew going into it that the gameplay was going to be largely the same thing, I guess. And graphically we also, for example, saw that, you know, it stays pretty in line with the... Yeah, again, they built a foundation with God of War 2018 and they very much built upon that a little bit more with this one, right? So it's never going to give you that experience that you had playing through 2018 for the first time where everything was fresh. But yeah, for it to then actually be more enjoyable, I couldn't have hoped really for more. At the same time, I do think that looking back at the story and sort of the much bigger scope that they ultimately decided to go with, there's also absolutely some issues with it that I do have, and it's this weird thing where I've heard other YouTubers talk about it, and I literally needed, I felt, the input and conversations from other people online to figure out how I felt about it myself. And it's this weird thing where I've heard a lot of things being pointed out about the story, and I totally agree with it. But nonetheless, yeah, like I said, it didn't really impact my experience with the game overall either. So it will be an interesting review that I'm going to do here. And by the way, one thing that I should quickly point out is that if you're interested in actually seeing my reactions to my first playthrough of the game, I am actually uploading that entire playthrough over on my other channel, which is called Robinoyo. So I will be linking that in the description. And yeah, over there already there should be about 4 or 5 parts of the playthrough up. I think there's going to be about 17 in total. So you can check out my entire playthrough and all my reactions to those great stories, scenes and stuff. Yeah, over there. So go and check that out. And maybe the other disclaimer that I should quickly make is that I wrote down all my thoughts here and I'm going to get into all of it. But I did try to save basically my spoiler talk regarding the story for the end of the video. So if you haven't beaten the game yet, or if you're, you know, not planning on buying it anytime soon, then you can watch the first part of the video here, and I'll save all the real detailed talk about the story for last, but I will also get into very specific thoughts that I had about the story. So for that, you'll probably see timestamps as well on the video. So without further ado, let's dive into my thoughts on God of War Ragnarok. Okay, so as I already mentioned, I definitely went through phases while playing this game. It started off immediately fantastic. The opening hour is perfect, if you'd ask me. And I was honestly surprised with how, you know, how reminiscent it felt to the opening hour of God of War 2018. It was almost like a carbon copy, except different in some ways, where the pacing was super similar, but also the way that, you know, it starts off super emotional and Kratos and Atreus spend time together before then introducing you basically to, and I think I can give away at least some of the stuff that happens in just the first hour or two, right? Yeah, Thor and Odin are immediately introduced, and that's a big deal because the first game was very limited, of course, in scope, and therefore kept a lot of these elements vague, right? Like Thor and Odin you'd only heard about, but you never really got to see them, apart from Thor at the very end in literally the last seconds of the game. But so now it's like, okay, this game suddenly feels almost in a rush, right? Because knowing that this second game was already going to close off the Norse saga, now they have to introduce you to these characters and get you to actually understand them and learn about their personalities before then, you know, again, I don't think this gives too much away, but ultimately having to face them at the end of it too, right? So that was, I really, really enjoyed the way that it set up the story. And then it's like that second and third hour where you basically go into Svartalfheim, the first realm, which you never visited in the first one. You're looking for Tyr, that's basically the objective that follows. And at that point, it basically becomes, oh yeah, this is familiar old God of War again, right? And so I kind of got exactly out of the first 3 hours of this game what I thought I was going to, which is like, oh, I'm getting God of War 2018 again. And that's great. It's not necessarily mind-blowing either. The story is probably going to be very good, but gameplay-wise, I know exactly what to expect. you know, the environments still look great, but they look the same. You know, it's like, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be a fantastic extension to that 2018 game, which I already loved. But, you know, I think story-wise, again, the scope of this game is so much larger. And so there's a lot more that it tries to do, many more characters and storylines that it sets up. And it's almost like God of War 2018, in retrospect, created a problem for God of War Ragnarok, looking back at it. Because this whole game, at its core, is about Ragnarok. It's about preventing Ragnarok, rather. But for that to matter in the first place, you actually had to feel like you were saving the realms and all of its inhabitants from that impending death, which was coming for them, right? The problem is that God of War 2018 was a rather empty game when you think about it. God of War 2018 had a very limited scope, and it was focused on the emotional, you know, connection that Kratos grew along with Atreus over the course of that game. They met a couple of characters along the way. You had Freya, of course, living in the woods. You had Brock and Sindri crafting the gear for you. Other than that, there was Baldur, who was your antagonist, and perhaps you could think about like the World Serpent just crawling around to space, helping you out sometimes with where to go, because you were trying to reach... The only thing you were trying to do is spreading those ashes and reaching the highest peak in all the realms, right? But you never actually got introduced to like, okay, what is the larger scope of this world in the first place? And so suddenly Ragnarok gets the task of not only, again, focusing on preventing Ragnarok and therefore saving everybody from it, but first making clear to you who the hell you're even saving in the first place. And so this is kind of where I get into my issues with the story overall, is that they introduce you to a bunch of different characters and storylines, and it's a little all over the place. And it gets to the point where some of the characters ultimately that you meet in the end, you just don't care about them. And so, you know, even like sort of some parts of the final sequences are in a way actually a little underwhelming, oddly enough. And that was a shame, because of course, as a journey on its own, and again, the emotional scenes that are in there, and when the game is focused, and when you see the additional, you know, sort of the way that it now builds upon that relationship with Kratos and Atreus even more, all those moments are great, and they're still there, and it still has its highlights, and you know, there's a particular conversation between Kratos and Atreus that's like my favorite scene in the whole game, and I'm pretty sure people will know what I'm talking about when I mention it here. Dude, like I didn't have tears in the moment, I will say that, because I was recording myself and it never happens. Looking back at it, man, that fucked me up. It really did. And I was like, holy shit, that is just as good as the blade scene that we had previously, which came completely out of nowhere, right? And so, again, you get this weird issue where sometimes it's just trying to do a little bit too much, and therefore lacks the impact in certain regards, whereas other things are still as fantastic as you expected them to be. And it got many people, of course, I've seen online to say that, you know, that they should have done a trilogy, I guess I mean to say, and I can't say that I fully disagree with that. I think some setting up these things a little bit better, and again, going for the climax then next time around with a third game probably could have been a better choice. I wonder why they decided to go with it the way they did, but, you know, it happened. And so ultimately, when I ended up beating the story mode, it was almost this surreal experience of like, okay, yeah, that was it. And where do we go from here? What happens now, right? And so I put the game down, and I didn't play it, I think, for another day or two anymore. Of course, I did have in the back of my head, like, I probably want to go back, get the platinum, do all the side stuff, but I wasn't necessarily, at first, feeling too eager to dive back in, because it felt like the book had sort of closed for me, right? Now, this is where we go into a whole different phase, you know, and like a phase that I hadn't seen coming at all, is that, well, the first thing I should point out, and this is definitely something that I wanted to flat out mention and give credit to, the soundtrack. Holy shit, dude, it just kept popping back into my head. I don't know, I mean, of course the soundtrack was already great, and it's the same composer, Bear McCreary, from the first game, but what he did with the soundtrack in this particular game, there's this one very sort of adventurous theme that keeps coming back, and I just had it playing in my head the whole time, and it was that alone which pulled me back into it and made me, gave me that extra boost to want to start doing all the side content earlier than I had expected it to, you know, to do it in the first place. Because this is the thing, it might be an unpopular opinion, I don't know, but in God of War 2018, I didn't really care for the side content. in general, I don't really find myself caring for side content because I tend to look at it almost always as like an inferior to whatever the main content is. You know, in God of War 2018, I will say that side content made a bit more sense. The journey had less pressure behind it. You know, it was very much driven by like Atreus wanting to explore, and of course there was a huge hub area in Midgard in 2018 that invited you to, you know, basically wander off and go to all these different shores that you had in sight, you know, to do a couple of those extra missions. But therefore, yeah, to me it also just felt like additional filler to it. And I realized that some of it was definitely high quality, like the dragon sections, I definitely remember them, don't get me wrong. Some of it was enjoyable, some of it was rather repetitive or felt insignificant to me. I'm thinking especially about stuff like the Muspelheim trials and the Niflheim, randomly generated spaces or stuff. I wasn't too fond of all that stuff, at least being forced to do it all for the platinum, I remember. But so actually what happened to me while playing God of War 2018 is playing the side content gave me a bit of an almost sour aftertaste from the main story, which I thought was fantastic. And, you know, made a huge video at the time about God of War 2018 too, and how I felt about the story. And so it was great because it felt like such a standalone journey that simultaneously set up a bunch of things for Ragnarok to follow up on here that already had me questioning and theorizing. And that's what I absolutely loved about it, right? But again, side content, a little bit of a sour aftertaste that I got from it, therefore. In God of War Ragnarok, it was the opposite, where the side content afterwards, not only is there actually a bunch of it, you know, again, I think I needed about 20-25 hours to beat the story, and then an additional 20 hours was spent just doing the side content alone. But they really put a bunch of effort into it. You know, you've got basically, I think, about 4 to 5 realms that form the biggest areas to explore, so like Vanaheim, right, and Svartalfheim, which are the new realms. But then they also have some stuff added to Alfheim, which now turned into a desert, basically. And you know, Midgard, of course, is frozen. So you know, they gave some of these realms that we already explored a nice little spin. But it really blew me away sometimes, where, for example, in Vanaheim, for me, as somebody who only really focused on the main story the first time around, I looked at Vanaheim and I'm like, holy shit, dude, this space is huge. It's gonna take me so much time to actually complete all the stuff that they've got in there. Then I find out that there's a whole different subsection on top of the map, which I didn't even realize was there in the first place. And you need to be, I think, very far along into the main story to even unlock it. Which had, you know, not only some really cool boss fights, because there's a bunch of boss fights in this game. They definitely stepped that game up, and they listened to all the critiques that we had from the first one about, you know, enemy variety, and of course, switching up the gameplay a little bit. And I won't go too much into it there, because, you know, a lot of it is going to be kind of spoiler heavy, I guess. But all of those little critiques that we kind of had of like, okay, yeah, this is definitely how they could have improved. They listened to all of that. So yeah, I think, you know, honestly, it was the level design that I appreciated the most about the side content too, where in Vanaheim, you automatically notice there's like several routes you can go, but then something seems sort of unreachable, so you just play whatever you feel like you can actually get to, right? And as soon as you do so, suddenly you'll find that like, oh, you're rising water levels again, the same way that you did kind of in 2018, and this unlocks different paths again. I'm like, holy shit, they put so much time and effort actually into the side content this time around. They truly made it sort of a whole... I mean, to me, it felt like the second half of that game. Just getting to do all the extra favors that were in the world. Some of them story-driven, some of them a little bit less so, but then have very interesting, like I said, design, whereas the campaign in itself is just super linear, I should say. So, yeah, man, I appreciated that so much. I like how they let you explore a little bit more this time around, and normally I'm not even a big fan of exploration, oddly enough, but like, of course, at first it was only the boat that you could use, and now it's like the sleds, which has a little bit more of a fast pace to it, and I don't know, everything just felt better. The puzzles, which I've actually heard people complain about, dude, I love the puzzles in this. I love the fact that there's, I don't know how many, but probably like 50 of those chests where you have to find the different bells and letters and this and that. I mean, I love that because I think this game is already super heavy on the combat. So anytime that they allowed me to sort of wander off and go explore a little bit or do one of the puzzles, to me, it was super enjoyable. And the open world exploration, you know, combined with the fact that now Kratos, for example, can use his blades as a grappling hook, which forces you to kind of look more vertically as well. Mimir's dialogue, you know, all the stories that are being told. Again, I'm not saying anything new. I'm not saying anything that wasn't already in the first game with that. But somehow, it all hit me a little bit more. It was more effective. I paid attention to it. I swear to God, in the final hour of playing this game, right, for me, as I was clearing up one of my very last objectives in the game, I'm basically entering this cart in Svartalfheim, riding up the rails, and I'm having this dialogue with Mimir. And Mimir says something, and I'm laughing my ass off, because Mimir mentions to Kratos, "Hey Kratos, how about next time around we take a stealthy approach for once?" And Kratos like, "No." And I found it so, yeah, I don't know, I mean, this game is so self-aware. And I love the fact that it just made me think about, yeah, 40 hours now I've been absolutely tearing everything apart. And now I get this line at the very end of my journey. It summarized the whole experience for me. And I couldn't have wished for more. Yeah, absolutely love that. Okay guys, so this is where we get into the spoiler territory for the game. I have warned you now, so make sure you get out if you haven't beaten, you know, the game yet. I don't even think I will have that much more to say, honestly, but I'm gonna kind of summarize. Well, I guess, yeah, most of it will be sort of issues that I had with the story. But that's only because it's so easy to mention those. I think overall, like I said, when I talk about the big moments that I loved about this game, and I'm gonna mention them now, so again, get out if you haven't already beaten the game. But obviously I was talking about that portal conversation, you know, between Kratos and Atreus. The way that Atreus would so awesomely bring that line back of "Don't be sorry, be better, father." Seeing a smile on Kratos' face in that moment, oh my god. You know, I was actually a little bit worried that, because Kratos has grown so much, not only in God of War 2018, but here I love how they kind of pick up 3 years later, or however long it's been, and you see that the bond between them has already developed even more, right? Like, they see themselves as equals, sort of now. Well, I mean, I guess, you know, Kratos obviously treated Atreus very harshly back in 2018. It's very obviously iconic that he kept calling him boy all that time, and in this game it only happens a couple of times in very tense moments, but he doesn't do that anymore, and that's for a reason. Atreus isn't a boy anymore, and so now they're truly learning from each other, and I was kind of worried. I'm not gonna lie about it. I was kind of worried that, like, okay, that will mean that they might just make Kratos too soft or something. Ultimately, I felt like all the development that Kratos went through in this game, it didn't make him soft. It just, yeah, again, he grew. And while still being the exact same personality that I kind of knew him as, and, you know, he was not afraid to put some people in their place, to answer a bunch of friendly asked questions to him with a single no constantly, you know, he was still that same Kratos, but at the same time trying to yeah, like I said, trying to be better, literally that. And I could very much just appreciate that overall. You know, obviously there's the Thea plot twist, which kind of came out of nowhere to me, and this is one of those things where, like, it's both a plus and a minus, because it felt to me like, yeah, what the hell is Thea even doing in this game? You know, you rescue him at first, and then he's just sitting there at the table the whole time, and doesn't really serve much of a purpose, right? Until you learn that, like, oh, he's actually been spying on you the whole time. And you get that with a bunch of these characters, and that's kind of specifically what I was talking about already earlier in the video, where, you know, if I just look at the grand scheme of all the storylines and characters we've been getting introduced to, like Angerboda, and of course you have Freya with a whole arc of, like, first being against you and then basically restoring her, restoring your relationship with her, which I did think was kind of well done. Well, I guess the change that she had felt sort of sudden, but then the conversations that Kratos and Freya have in Vanaheim, I really did appreciate. But yeah, you know, again, Asgard, as far as, like, introducing you to so many characters, right? I mean, there's Thor, there's Odin, there's Heimdall, there's Thrud, Sif, the refugee kid. You have Freya's camp, Freyr, and that boar guy. You know, there's also, like, a couple of parts near the end involving, for example, Skoll and Hati, right? And then the Surtur guy that you go to. All these things to, like, basically set Ragnarok in motion, only because you've been told that, like, oh, these things need to happen for Ragnarok to happen, I guess. So they just sort of felt like these obligations. But there wasn't enough build up to it. And so ultimately, it all kind of feels like this cluttered, mess sounds so negative. Like I said, it's kind of like it was enjoyable in the moment, so don't get me wrong, and I do think some of it was tackled well, but some of it also just felt too fast. Pacing is definitely overall just the, it's not consistent in this game. Whereas the first one was a very simple story and therefore got to, highlight the way that Kratos kept building that bond with Atreus in so many great ways, and having a couple of surrounding characters to add to that, but not going all over the place. Your objective was very clear, was easy to follow along with, and then this is kind of like, okay, what the hell are we doing next? And it gets to the point where you just don't really find yourself caring much anymore, and you're just looking to see what the outcome of it is going to be, if that makes sense. That being said, this is the other thing that I really want to get into, and it's simply that some of the stuff that God of War 2018 set up, which it did so wonderfully. I came off of that game and I was super eager to discover what role the World Serpent was still going to play, what that prophecy on the mural actually meant. Like who the hell blew the horn? All these questions that we had coming off of that first game, and then this game kind of like, again, the World Serpent, it's explained, but not really, right? Where like you actually meet him only once in the early parts of the game again with Atreus, of course, who was playable in this game. Didn't mention that yet, but really enjoyed that gameplay with him too. I thought it was a nice shift. You meet the World Serpent, and then later on in the Angerboda part, Atreus, puts that giant soul into that one serpent that he finds, the one snake. That turns out to be the World Serpent, right? Okay, that's cool. But then later on in the final fight, he shows up once again and then gets sent back in time, and you don't really understand why. And it's like, okay, I just expect it to have been a bigger deal than it was. It basically, for the way that Cory Barlog especially talked about this story after 2018 in many of the spoiler casts that he was present in and stuff, I love that passion that I saw him have, and the way he talked about, oh yeah, we wrote this story with already in our heads setting up what's going to happen in the next ones, and I just didn't actually feel like that here too much. Which I just, I heard the new director, Eric Williams, talk about how basically the only instructions that he was given is like, okay, Ragnarok needs to happen, Cory told him. Brock needs to die, that's something that he wanted to happen apparently. And the kid needs to leave at the very end of the game, right? Everything else was sort of up to him to do, and it reminded me of that Last Jedi situation from Star Wars, where I also felt like The Force Awakens, people had their issues with it, and they felt too much like, that movie was sort of a repeat of A New Hope, right? Then The Last Jedi came, whole new director, story basically, he was given all the freedom that he wanted with it, and he decided to just do something else with it entirely, and all the setup that they had done in the previous one just didn't really matter all that much anymore. And it sucks, because like you see some people talk about, the person that blew the horn back in 2018, what that was supposed to be is like Kratos using the Gjallarhorn or whatever, because it transcends time and space or something, it was explained. But then, no, that turns out not to be it either. Even Cory Barlog himself on Twitter confirmed that. And it's like, yeah, some things they really just didn't get around to explaining. And I understand that, of course, prophecy is a big part of this story. I mean, it's basically the main part. And some elements of that I really liked. I love the idea of all these characters are basically struggling because they know their fate already in advance. It's that very interesting idea of what if you knew when you were going to die? How would that impact you? How would that change you? I'm sure you would spend your next 24 hours quite differently if you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, right? And then of course there's the Norns that you go to, and with them it's like it's really funny because they keep repeating the lines, and the way they put it is like, okay, we just know what's going to happen simply because we know people don't change. And that's the whole purpose, of course, of the story. That like Kratos was trying to change. He was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to not kill the gods for once, but actually, try and work out a solution together. And that's what allowed him to live. But then at the same time, I wonder about like, okay, but you could have still shown what the prophecy was supposed to mean then at first. What would have actually happened? Was it as simple as then Kratos dying? I don't think so, because it seemed like they were doing something more than that, with Kratos literally laying in Atreus' arms and then there's the weird either soul or like sort of the form of a snake or a serpent coming out of his mouth and stuff, right? Clearly, it felt to me like they were doing something more with that, and ultimately here they decided to answer it in a much more simpler way than I had imagined. And again, that goes for the world serpent, it goes for that mural with Kratos. The horn didn't even get explained in the first place, and that's the disappointing part, because there's plenty to enjoy about this story here, but you still want it to live up to that expectation that the first game had shaped of like, okay, this is everything we're going to be delving into, and it just didn't. Yeah, and I find that a shame, because like I said, there's good things here too. I loved Odin's performance. You know, the time that you spent with Thor, that bar brawl that you get, you know, near the end of it. Plenty of highlights, right? Plenty of great stuff. Overall, very enjoyable, but then just not what I had completely wanted out of it. And I think that's, you know, that's the underwhelming part about God of War Ragnarok that really should not be denied, and I see a lot of people sort of ignoring that conversation altogether because they look at the game very surface level and they're like, well, did I enjoy my time with it? And I get that, because at the end of the day, games are just entertainment. They've become that for me more as well. I don't really find myself, you know, like I don't often find myself being as opinionated anymore in the first place. I just kind of sit back and enjoy the ride for what it is nowadays myself too. But with this game in particular, this franchise was special. God of War 2018 was special. And so I just felt like, man, if Ragnarok could have just done those couple of things on top of that, that really would have been the cherry on top overall. So yeah, guys, I think those were all my thoughts summarized basically about this game. I hope you enjoyed it. I realized that there's a bunch of people who also talk, for example, about stuff like, oh yeah, the Ironwood section that was a little too long and the pacing was off there, right? And I totally agree with those things too. In the grand scheme of things, however, it's not really something I reflect on because, again, this was a sort of 40-hour experience for me. And so, you know, those 2 hours being a little too long could have been cut down to an hour. I mean, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But it is those couple of story elements overall that to me, you know, is like the thing that I think back to, yeah, that I would have wanted to have been different about it. But guys, I hope you all enjoyed my thoughts on God of War Ragnarok. Of course, like I said, you can actually watch my entire first playthrough and my reactions to playing it, therefore, for the first time, over on my other channel, Robinoyo. Like I said, I'll be linking that in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, of course, if you're new here. And then, yeah, I look forward to seeing you back in a new video, hopefully very soon.